Two monsters were chasing the boy, who had a huge book behind him. One of the monsters had already opened its jaws in an attempt to grab the fugitive, but he managed to squeeze through a narrow crevice and escape. Looking outside through the ruins of a high-rise building, the boy saw many of the same monster. Suddenly, a tentacle grabbed his leg and dragged him down. Due to the strong and unexpected jerk, the book flew off his shoulders. Suddenly he woke up. Sitting in the passenger compartment of the bus, it seemed to be just a nightmare. Outside the window it was pouring rain, and several classmates were playing chatting by lantern light. Dozens of schoolchildren were trudging through a thicket of woods. The leader asked them to take care of their hands and feet and to check to see if anyone was left behind. Rain and fog with thunderstorms, precipitation of 60 millimeters per hour, and all his shoes soaked. This was his first school trip and, it seemed, his most unsuccessful. The quiet anxiety inside grew with each step, like rainwater falling back into the sky. Suddenly, Jang Si-him was called out by a girl, reminding her to walk more carefully. She realized that the boy was hanging around by himself as well and shared her desire to go a little farther than their excursion. Chan asked not to scare him, but Kim Dae-sum asked him to relax, because who but she would be able to take care of him. Their conversation was interrupted by the fall of one of the walkers. The scene caught everyone's attention, but the bully ordered them to stop staring and go on about their business. Chan looked at that horrible fellow Ma Dongchul with disgust. The bully continued to bully, telling his classmate that no one cared about him. He wondered how their relationship would turn out in the second year. Dongchul concluded that there was nothing that could be done, but asked the boy not to worry. After all, it was just a school trip, nothing to create an incident. Poor Kijong looked straight into Chan's eyes. Dongchul ordered him to pull himself together and stop staring off to the side. Realizing his victim wasn't listening, the bully swung around and raked him in the face, causing the audience to look away in embarrassment. Si-han was pissed off about the whole school trip situation. The word from there was that the bus was delayed due to the weather and there was nothing that could be done. Even though he couldn't help that poor kid, Chan wasn't willing to put up with the injustice. He took out his phone and started filming what was happening on his smartphone camera. Chan didn't know if he would have felt more comfortable if he hadn't done anything. It was getting to the point where he was shivering, but staying out of it wasn't working. Now he was definitely going to show that asshole Dongchul. It looked like no one would support him, the pathetic cowards who could only keep quiet and walk the line. He's a fair man. He was about to step forward, but suddenly Kim grabbed him by the shoulder and turned his back to the fighting. He asked what he was doing there. That got the bully's attention, but the leader ordered him to move on. He realized that it was getting late and everyone was tired, but he asked them to remain calm and orderly so that they could get home as soon as possible. Ahead, everyone noticed a huge building that was a short distance away. Soon the travelers reached it and went inside. The man told them that while they waited to hear from the school, they could lay out their things and look at the rooms, but he asked them to wait in the hall. The building was truly luxurious. Kim asked a friend to take a picture of her there. She said that she had not expected anything like this on such a remote island. Chan agreed. He found the interior of the building very atmospheric and elegant. She noticed that the guy was unhappy about something, but she couldn't find out what it was. Chan took out the camera of his smartphone and was about to press the shutter, but Dongchul pushed him so that the gadget fell out of his hands and shattered. The bully pretended that he didn't do it on purpose and even apologized, but the next moment he laughed about the situation with his friend, who praised the crushing blow. Kim inquired about her friend's condition and expressed regret for the incident, but Chan calmed the girl down, saying it wasn't her fault. He reached for his phone but cut himself on the glass. Dongchul caught Si-him's angry look and approached him again, asking him what he just said to him. Jang didn't understand what it was about, but the bully accused him of being a coward for not being able to repeat the insult to his face. Kim stood up for her friend, telling the bully that it was none of his business what Chan had said, but he ordered him to shut up, though he was impressed by the girl's confidence. Dongchul asked if they thought he'd started it first. Chan stated that if Ma had pushed him, he should apologize because he wasn't going to swear. The bully countered that he wasn't the only one pushing, so he's not going to apologize. Dongchul asked if Chan was proud of his appearance, but the altercation was interrupted by the principal, who was informed of the altercation by one of the students. The bully crushed the phone with his foot and said they would meet later, then went to take a seat with his comrades. Kijin watched with such excitement that he bit his fingers until they bled. Two lads stood on the lookout with a drooping look. In the middle of the room sat Chan, who was ordered to rise. His whole face was bruised and bloody. Ma Dongchul stopped his persistent comrade and asked Si-him to show his face. The bully was glad that it didn't look so smarmy now. Dongchul stated that he was just instilling etiquette in people. If Jang showed good manners, he promised to make him look like Kijong. Dongchul slapped the junior's face with force. He said that primitive people have better manners than Chan. It seems to be because modern people don't need to chop two heads. With those words, Dongchul hit the boy again in a way that took his breath away. Chan had never imagined that he would end up in the same territory as this jerk. He knew he wasn't on the allocation table, so maybe someone had switched rooms. However, now was not the time to think about that. See, him felt like he was about to die. Mentally, he begged for help. Suddenly, Li Qijong appeared on the threshold of the room. Suddenly, he smiled and then started laughing, which made Chan's face look puzzled. He had expected this from anyone but this guy, for he of all people should know this pain. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. He was the only one who could have stood up for Qijong, but now he was cursing his keen sense of justice. The laughter caught Dongchul's attention. The bully asked what was going on. Was Qijong really amused by his friend's beating, but Li called it disgusting. Dongchul interjected about what he said, calling Pran a jerk, but Qijong insulted his opponent in return, calling all of his friends jerks, as well as those just silently watching. The bully smiled. He enjoyed Qijong's fiery speech. He assumed that these guys were now covering each other's asses, and then with a crazed look, slapped the poor guy across the face with such force that he slumped to the floor. To Chan's horror, Dongchul continued kicking the recumbent with shouts of "Die!" Having finished their business, the company of ruffians went out the door. The bullies told those on the lookout that they would be back soon, and asked them to explain everything to their elders if they asked. When they left, the boys exhaled and ran into the room, apologizing for what had happened. Chan objected that there was no need to apologize, for they had their reasons. Those said that they really didn't have anything to say, and then asked about the strange sounds. Seeheim explained that it was Dongchul's attention shifting abruptly from him to Qijong, who was now lying on the floor without strength, but it wasn't just a whim of the bully. They say even an earthworm wriggles if you step on it. Chan believed he was alive thanks to Qijong. Still, it was the first time he'd seen him so confident and bold, so he asked Li why he'd taken a step when he was centimeters away from Dongchul's fist. Qijong chuckled at the saying about the worm. They were the ones that made him cringe, because they sounded like it was indeed easy to crush. Someone was beaten simply for raising his voice. The others present didn't understand what they were talking about, so Qijong continued to explain. For a unicum like Ma Dongchul, one victim was enough, but it wasn't just him. Even if it was his closest friend, what mattered was that it was already a foregone conclusion. Li concluded that himself, Jiang, and everyone else were intertwined in this endless cycle of violence that spun faster and faster each time. The deafening thunder startled one of the girls so much that she screamed, amusing her friends. Another spun a bottle that pointed to the next storyteller. She was asked to tell a ghost story, but the girl objected that she wasn't very good at them. Upon reflection, she wondered if those gathered had heard the story of the talking ants. In the past, their ancestors had worshipped the gods and made great efforts to communicate with them. Shamans, priests, and others, whatever they might be called, the few people who had access to communication with higher beings gained great power. Those who are endowed with such privileges and power do terrible things in order to gain even greater power in contact with the gods. However, to them themselves, the gods who came into this world, human desire meant absolutely nothing. Wishes came true, wars continued, that is when tragedy struck, when history was written in notes instead of ink. The wish of a powerful man that came true brought only sorrow instead of joy. He regretted it very much, as he had never imagined it would come true in such a way. Returning to the beginning of the story, the storyteller asked if the audience had heard of talking ants. She asked them to imagine that they had been called somewhere by ants. The wishes of these little insects must be very insignificant. The most of them is a lump of sugar. However, what would they do if the ants in this world had everything? Negotiating or even threatening them would not work, for they cannot even speak. To function in their society in this way would be very problematic and would probably turn into trouble. The only thing left is to exterminate all the ants. The story was interrupted by a loud sound. The girls remembered that there were guys in room 304. Judging by the sound, Ma Dongchul was there. He must have insulted someone again and thrown them against the wall. Kim immediately thought of Chan, hoping he was okay. She pulled out her phone to text him, but one of the girls noticed it and immediately asked what she had for him. The others said they were quite suitable for each other, a good boy and a good girl. Kim awkwardly got up from the couch and, citing fatigue, said goodbye to her friends. The banter pissed her off. She didn't understand who cared about Jiang Sihim and why she should care about what Ma Dongchul would do to him. She reassured herself that everything would work out, but she soon caught herself thinking that she was actually worried about this guy. The man begged the priests for forgiveness while on his knees. He promised that he would not repeat the mistake twice and prepare the sacrifice again, but they were deaf to the unfortunate man's pleas. The priests asked the man to lift up his head and not be afraid. His hour had come. One of them raised his hand, causing the victim unbearable pain. It seemed his eyes were about to burst. Soon he swore that he would gladly serve even if he died until the second coming of God. The loudspeaker announced the morning rise, and the class teachers were ordered to count the students and take them to the announcement point. Teacher Hojin yawned widely from his early rising, noticing Teacher Pagong nearby, who advised him to rest. The man said hello and explained that he was going as well. He said that he had called the principal early in the morning because among the 4th grade students last night, someone had left the hotel. The principal was very nervous. The girl was very surprised, but then Hojin asked about the jerk Ma Dongchul. Seeing the teacher approaching, the boy warned his classmates. However, the man noticed it and teased the rowdy student. The teacher then turned to Han Suya and asked her to give the class leader a list of children who were not in the building. The girl reported that there were 3 people not in the building right now: Ma Dongchul, Ho Zhong, and Seo Minwon. Hojin asked if they knew where the other students in room 304 were, but received a negative answer. The leader then asked for a show of hands for those who were feeling ill or not in the best physical shape. Han Sua noticed Daesim's pained face, but she said she felt fine, she just didn't sleep well. In fact, she had been having nightmares all night, but they were so vivid that Kim even wondered if everything was really happening. That dream she had last night, a man struggling in incredible pain collapsed to the ground. His body was being torn apart by worms. She had never even heard of such a thing, but it was impossible to sleep after what she had seen. Finally, the leader announced that they were going to leave the hotel for a morning meeting and asked them to follow so they wouldn't get lost. Kim remembered that Jang Si-him lived in room 304. She called out to the guy and asked about the strange noises coming from his room yesterday, and today several people were missing from there. She wondered if her friend was okay, but asked to be understood correctly, explaining that she was only asking out of interest. Chang said that he'd been beaten up a little, but otherwise he was fine. Kim only now noticed his face, assuming that Dongchul had done it. The boy says there's nothing to be done, it would be glorious if they weren't found. He had gotten himself into a mess by chance and just hoped that something like this wouldn't happen again. Finally, the leader announced the gathering. The crowd of students moved towards the exit. The man reminded them of their precautions and asked them not to go too far. Soon it was announced that the principal was given the floor. The man stepped to the podium and said hello to the students. He said that before the decree came out, he had to inform the assembly about the unpleasant event of the previous evening. They had hoped that the school trip would be safe for everyone, but the school authorities failed to consider some factors. Yesterday, the local police of Banhiang Island reported to the principal that a group of looters had broken into a private residence. Investigation confirmed that the perpetrators were students of the school, so transfer papers had to be signed for some of them. The principal stated that the island police have wonderful people and asked the audience to thank them for their service. The man then announced that all schedules associated with this trip are canceled until all students get home. He asked everyone to stay in their rooms until the detainees returned. Because of this, the departure would be a little later. The principal also expressed the hope that the class teachers would help the students in case of emergency and that the hotel staff would always be there for them. Breathing heavily, Ma Dongchul made his way through the thicket of the forest. The hooligan looked rather shabby, but when he saw the hotel building, he was glad that he had survived and escaped from that nightmare. 6 hours ago, he and 2 other men had gone to the pier for a walk, but there was no open bar on the island, so they had to manage on their own. One moment they smelled a strong odor of fish, and the next second a huge silhouette came out of the water behind Minwon's back and grabbed him by the head and threw him into the sea. This didn't please his friends. Ho Konu tried to attack the assailant, but was sent flying several meters away by a powerful blow. Dongchul broke the bottle and jabbed the point into his opponent's body, from which worms spurted out. Looking at his disfigured, bandaged face, the bully came to a terrible conclusion: this man was decomposing. Dongchul didn't have time to think about what he had seen. The monster knocked him out. All 3 of them were tied up, with bags over their heads. The car was moving toward the exit of the island, with the dead man at the wheel. The Red Priestess praised him for his work. She informed him that they should proceed without delay. The driver backed her up, saying that these wandering children had no idea what honor awaited them to become a vessel. The priestess argued that they were the messengers of a great being, and therefore should simply serve him. The monster apologized, explaining that he liked to grumble. The woman ordered her friend to speed up, as time was running out. The celestial equality was approaching. She had no doubt that the Great One would be pleased. The car turned off the road into the forest. Dongchul woke up and realized with horror the predicament he was in. He tried to wake his friends, but was ordered to cover his mouth and ears. The priestess lit the candles around the altar and informed the captives that the moment of accepting grace and favor had arrived. Dongchul started shouting, asking where these sick killers had brought them. He told them that they couldn't kill 3 schoolchildren so easily. The priestess walked over to the table and cupped her hand with a knife to fill a bowl. She said it was an honor to be the vessel of the Great One, and to spoil such a moment was true sacrilege. One of them a decomposing monster, the other slashing away. Dongchul realized that these were not the ones who would be affected by the threat of going to the police. He realized that the situation was monstrous. No one knew what would happen in the next moment, which meant there was only one option: escape. Having filled the jug, the priestess held it out to the dead man, who drank the blood from it. Dongchul realized that this was his chance. He had to run away while these lunatics were distracted, but somehow unnoticed. However, the bully didn't know what to do at all. First he decided to look around. There was a candle nearby, so he put his hands near it. It worked. The rubber tie began to melt, although it was incredibly hot. He endured as much as he could. It was only a little longer, a little more, and the tie would tear. But the priestess noticed the fugitive, and in one fell swoop she cut the bags off the heads of the prisoners. She said that the divine consciousness had begun. Resistance was pointless. Suddenly the jug shattered, attracting the attention of the schoolchildren. They stared in horror at the huge monster with the extended toothy mouth. The priestess marveled at its appearance and asked if it could hear her. She asked the monster to take her sacrifice for using the knowledge of the ancients. Manhwa was the first to get in the monster's path. The monster impaled his body with its hand and lifted him up and bit his face. The priestess ordered them not to be afraid and not to run. Wherever they went, the monster would always be there. Donchul couldn't believe his eyes. Only a couple of seconds ago he had seen his comrade die at the hands of a real monster. Suddenly, Manhwa rose to his knees and began to wriggle, screaming in unbearable pain. Seeing this horrible picture, Donchul got up and ran away towards the exit. The priestess caught up and threw a knife at the boy, which grazed his shoulder without causing serious damage. Konu, splattered with the blood of his slain comrade, asked Ma what to do, but he simply ran past, ignoring the poor man's pleas. Donchul couldn't believe he'd gotten himself into such a mess. He stopped in the middle of the forest. He couldn't leave his friends behind, but he couldn't go back, and there was nothing he could do. The bully decided to report the incident to the school and call for help, but he couldn't find his phone in his pockets. He must have dropped it when he ran away. Donchul just hoped it would be over as soon as possible. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the sea. Going to the source of the sound, Ma was able to make his way out to the dock. There were people below, so Donchul decided to immediately tell them what had happened and ask for help. However, they were loading vessels that bore the same marks as the jug of that mad priestess. From behind, the boy felt someone's presence. Turning around, Donchul saw a big bearded man. The man informed him that he couldn't be here, as this was the place to escape from the island. The big man promised to take him back to where he should be at the moment. Donchul woke up in the front seat of a van driven by the big man from the marina. The man advised him to see a doctor, looking rather pale. The driver realized that Donchul was one of the students who had come to see the wonders of the island. Suddenly, the guy hit the man with all his might. He lost control of the van and flew off the highway. The van crashed, but Donchul managed to escape through a broken window. Kim Munho talked about a special kind of fishing for octopus on Banhang Island using jugs. These creatures have one peculiarity: they seek shelter in the crevices of rocks, so if you lower the vessel into the water, the octopus itself will be there. The leader yawned widely from the tedious interview and suggested the board students to go outside and practice. He asked those who wanted to see the potted octopus to raise their hands. Kim sat down next to Chan, even though the seat was already taken. She heard him talk about Kijin and Juwon, but the young man countered that there was nothing of the sort. Kim continued to insist, but Sihan raised his hand, and the leader motioned for him to step forward. Chan didn't understand why such a thing would be asked. Yes, Dongchul had beaten him yesterday, but he shouldn't have made so much fuss about those underlings. It was Kijong who bothered him more than them. He had never seen the silent fellow like he had yesterday. Chan looked into the jug and found an octopus. Suddenly the animal clung with its tentacles to the face of the frightened schoolboy. The supervisor asked Chan why he froze and asked him to let others see it. It seemed to be a nightmare too. The boy explained that he couldn't see the octopus yet, so he wanted a better look. Upon seeing the creature's voice, Chan recoiled, bumping into Kijong, and dropped the vessel in surprise. Chan asked Kim if she'd seen it, but she didn't understand, but she said she had to deal with the jug first. However, Kijong reported that he, too, had seen those rectangular torn pupils and bright yellow glittering eyes. Suddenly, Daesum cried out, hurting herself on the shards of the jug. Blood spurted from her finger, so the leader asked the girls to take their classmate to the infirmary on the second floor. The man then announced that the others were going to the cafeteria and then continue watching the video lessons. However, he asked Chan and Kijong to stay in the room and clean up the splinters. The leader opened the door, but suddenly, the walking dead man who was holding Minwon and Chona on chains also appeared on the doorstep. The supervisor recognized the students and asked the guests why they had shackled and stabbed the children. The man asked the headmaster who had stepped forward if he could see it. The man asked the teacher to take his time. Hojin did not understand what this meant and drew the principal's attention to the disfigured faces of the prisoners. However, the man asked him to be careful what he said, because there were children behind him, and these people had also brought back the missing students. Hojin turned to Kim Daesum and reminded them that they had to go to the infirmary. He told them to do their business and return to the dining hall. Kim found the new guests creepy. It wasn't even their appearance, but the atmosphere. She couldn't remember where she'd seen them. Her friend drew Daesum's attention to the wound, because there shouldn't be so much blood from a splinter cut. The girl looked at her wound with horror and fainted. but she was picked up by the hotel receptionist. The strange man gestured to Kim's friend to be quiet. The manager reminded Hojin what he was talking about. Despite the aliens' rather crude methods, they are wonderful people. The supervisor didn't object and simply thanked them for saving his students. He admitted that he had almost made a mistake, and then handed the guests a business card with a number and asked them to call next time in case of a similar incident. However, the priestess objected that the children had already taken their seats, which caused a puzzled look on Hojin's face. The supervisor asked to release the students, but the principal intervened, asking the teacher to attend to his schedule and promised to take care of the children himself. Hojin again did not object and went with the rest of the students to lunch. The tables were laden with various seafood delicacies. Chan clutched his head and exhaled heavily. This caught the attention of a classmate, who laughed when he asked if he was allergic to the food, but asked him not to worry about the crab. His brother would take care of it. Chan told them to eat whatever they wanted, and at the same time asked if they'd seen Kijong. Han Sua reported that Lee had skipped dinner and went to his room because he said he was buying food at the nearest supermarket. Chan asked the girl about the reason, but she didn't know for sure. She only suggested that Kijong might have an illness that made him unable to eat seafood. Sehim decided to follow his comrade's example and was soon paying at the checkout counter. He didn't understand why everyone was so calm. Even after bringing back the perpetrators of school violence, Chan tries to ignore it on Lee Kijong's advice. However, everyone seems to be fine with this chain of violence he was talking about. Apparently, Chan is the only one who is upset upon hearing such a sad story, though the other students had always been people who wouldn't do anything unless it affected them. But he was determined to show Kijin that he was no different from this spineless mass. Chan stood on the threshold of his comrade's room and was about to open the door, but Lee beat him to it. The boy was very surprised to see Kijong with a knapsack on his back. The nurse informed Kim that she had finished applying the bandage. Although the wound wasn't very deep, it was bleeding quite a mile, so Pogon recommended that the bandage not be removed just yet. The girls thanked the nurse, and the nurse expressed hope that there would be no more cuts. Pogon said she'd be out for a minute and asked the patients to sit there for another 15 minutes before heading to lunch. A friend asked how Kim was feeling. She said she was feeling better and thanked Dolly for her help, but asked how the girl had managed to get her to the nurse's station. Dolly said it was no big deal and warned her that she was going to the store. Kim asked to get her a Coke, but lastly asked her friend if those people in the lobby seemed strange. Dolly remembered the change. She'd never seen anything like that, but that wasn't what Kim had meant. She asked about the feeling of a chill running through her skin when they'd shown up. Dolly said she was so hungry right now that her head wasn't thinking straight, so she offered to talk about it later and withdrew. Kim lay back on the couch and put her headphones in her ear. She was sure she'd seen those people somewhere, she just couldn't remember where. She was surprised to find there was no signal, so she just turned back to the wall, turning on the music. Through the window, someone's silhouette was watching the girl. Kim listened to the music, unaware that she was being watched. Suddenly, the window opened, causing Kim to jump up. Suddenly, a shabby-looking Dong Chul flew into the room and snatched the phone out of Kim's hands. He'd had enough of this idiotic island. He tried to use the gadget for its intended purpose, but the lack of signal drove him mad, and Dong Chul threw the device against the table in a rage. The bully ran toward the entrance, which allowed Kim to see the tattoo on his back, which, by the way, horrified the girl and she passed out. Chan reported that he had brought his comrade lunch. Since Kijong was allergic to seafood, the boy held out corn kozanaki to him, explaining that there was too much here for one. Lee smiled, concluding that they were alike after all, and handed Chan his backpack, ordering him to open it. Chan pulled an unusual blade out of the bag in bewilderment, asking Kijong why he had brought the weapon here. However, the boy countered that Chan knew all about it himself, since he had come here. He stated that the eyes were a revelation. Sehim didn't understand what the guy was talking about, but Kijin kept talking. He said that he couldn't see anything with his eyes, because that privilege is only for those who have been given the choice. Kijin stated that they are living up to expectations. He then ordered Chan to cut out the bridle and show those who set the seals. Lee ordered the frightened boy to take the knife and promised that he would do the honor of tasting the bridal meat just a bite. Kijong wanted to save everyone, however, and asked Chan if he could happily hold the knife. The schoolboy didn't understand why he had to do that, but the madman explained that he was good at taking the pain of others as sacrifice. It seemed to Chan that his insane comrade had repeated Ma Dongchul's words, but Kijong countered that the jerk didn't count. Thanks to Chan, his plan had gotten a little squeaky clean, but most importantly, Chan must cut the bridle. Dongchul ran into the hotel lobby and snatched the student's phone from her again, but there was still no signal. What was happening was being filmed on the phone. The bully ordered to stop doing that as others were no better than him. Suddenly, he saw a staircase leading upstairs. His body reacted faster than Donghul could think to get to the roof. Surely it would be possible to catch a signal from a high point and send a message for help outside. Suddenly, the principal appeared on the threshold of the second floor, and beside him were new guests that Dong-hol couldn't mistake for anyone else. From surprise, he fell down and dropped his phone, which shattered. The guy couldn't contain his emotions and swore, which didn't please the headmaster. The priestess picked up the device and handed it to the guy, but he didn't want the woman to get too close to him. She said she was the first to find her place and advised the bully to think twice before trying to leave this island. Hearing a prolonged scream, Ki-jong snatched the bag from his comrade's hands, saying that he didn't seem to be ready for anything. Chan wondered if his companion had heard the scream, but Lee ordered him to follow, promising that they'd do it together, since Chan had the right to do so. Pogun walked down the corridor, typing a message to Hojin, but there was no signal. However, they soon met in person. The girl asked if he had been in a meeting with the principal, but the teacher didn't understand the meeting in question. Pogun said she had sent a message in the morning, but Hojin said he hadn't received anything, especially since the principal had gone to the nurse's station with the missing students. The girl interjected, wondering if the missing ones had returned. Meanwhile, Dong-chul knocked the phone out of the priestess's hands. He wasn't even going to change his mind about leaving the damn island and stated that no one would listen to the bullshit of murderers like her and her rotten friend. The principal tried to stop the altercation, but Ma ordered him to shut up and asked him if he wanted to know what those lunatics were doing. The guy said that those bastards were lying and was about to tell what had happened to him and his friends, but he was interrupted by Hojin, explaining that Minwon and Jianu had already been brought back. The leader asked Dong-chul to stop shouting and come down, but he ordered the teacher to stop talking nonsense, because he had seen the two men die with his own eyes. He didn't understand why he wasn't believed and asked if the school authorities thought he was crazy. In that case, Dong-hol asked to turn him in to the police and there would be nothing to worry about, but the hotel administrator said there was no need for that and promised to prove him wrong. The man asked to look closely and showed the missing men, who were still chained up. The receptionist then took out a key and removed the shackles, exposing the boys' necks, which were covered with strange growths. Dong-chul looked at his former friends in horror, then lost his temper and said that he would never forgive those lunatics for what they had done. Julian tried to pounce on the priestess with his fists, but at that time Ki-jong came up and in a long jump knocked Dong-hol off his feet with such force that he lost consciousness. Lee grinned evilly and reached into his bag for his dagger to finish the job, but his backpack was empty. Ki-jin looked around confusedly and spotted Chan on the stairs, hiding something behind his back. This is the end of part 1. If you want to see part 2, let's get 500 likes. And also write in the comments the word monster. That way I'll know that you've seen this video to the end. And also write in the comments, how do you like this montage? Or to return to the previous montage, where all the pictures are enlarged. Write about it. It's important for me to know about it. That's all for now. See you later and bye-bye.